Welcome back! This is another episode of Flute Tip of the Week. You can tell that I am not in my apartment in London, probably as this beautiful, speckled concrete wall will tell you. I'm currently in a dorm room in one of the residence buildings at the University of Ottawa in Canada. I'm doing a Young Artist program as part of the National Arts Centre, and it's been a really fantastic couple of weeks with great chamber music and meeting lots of interesting people. And it's been nice to be able to do a little bit more focused work back home. Anyway, this is not what this video is about. Today what we're going to be talking about is the classical world's most favorite animal for the flute to portray, the bird. Let's get to it. For solos like at the beginning of Messiaen's Merle Noir, where you have a bird call, you must remember that birds don't romanticize. They don't dance around the point, they have short bursts, they can be quite angular, and they always have a very pure tone. Of course, this can be different for what kind of bird you portray. For example, if somehow the flute is supposed to portray a loon, then we're going to have a very different idea of what a tone should be for that animal. For Le Merle Noir, this is a blackbird, and blackbirds can have very short, very angry songs. So when you're playing this on the flute, you have to make sure that you're not just reveling in the beauty of the solo and the way that it was written. If you know enough about Messiaen, you know that he was a church organist who absolutely adored nature. He would sit outside with his manuscript paper and copy down the calls of birds and the sounds of the wild. Part of being a flutist is taking advantage of cadenza opportunities, but we need to make sure that we always pick and choose our time to be extremely expressive. For this piece, we don't really have the context to be able to justify playing very romantically, to have broad gestures. What we need to do is we need to perfectly emulate a blackbird. And this blackbird is quite angry, especially with the kinds of harmonies that Messiaen is using. For example, it can be really easy to over-romanticize this like this. And already, we've got to remember that there are very specific rhythmic values in this piece, and even though this is a solo section, we still need to really look at what the composer wrote. I'm not saying that you need to do this for every single piece, because if you were to take every single piece at face value, then music would probably die quite quickly. But now that we know what the context of this piece is, an angry blackbird, it makes a little bit more sense when you play it as if you are like a kind of little pissed off little black bird flying around and just thinking, why is this human copying down what I'm saying? That's so annoying. Why are you still writing? And when you play it that way, it's still really interesting, and it still has lots of expression in there, because you are now taking on the character of this piece's namesake. I'm still really focusing on how he's written the dynamics, how he's written the rhythm, and this isn't something that sounds strict and straightforward. This is still something that is very organic. It's not just in Messiaen that we need to pay attention to this either. There are lots of really famous flute solos throughout the orchestral repertoire that we also need to take into account. There's pieces like Saint-Saëns, the Carnival of the Animals, and Volière, but we also have cases with really famous repertoire that we are accustomed to ever since we're kids, like Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf. When you're thinking about the story that is behind the music as well, we know that this bird, he's quite brash. He has a bit of an ego. He's always like, oh, you duck, you don't know how to fly, you're not a bird, I'm a bird. And he knows that he's Peter's best friend, and he's a very brave little guy. And when we have his entry call near the beginning of the piece, we need to make sure that we don't get overly caught up in, this is a flute solo, this is an orchestral piece, this is my moment to shine. No. This is the character coming in. This is the character being introduced. You can still imagine it being a little bit more animated than a regular bird, however. If you think about it in like a children's story, you can still imagine this being almost a cartoon bird. And again, we have very specific dynamics, accents, and also rhythms. Very similar to Messiaen's piece, we gotta make sure that we don't take too many liberties just because this is a flute. Flutes kind of sound like birds, so we don't really need to make the extra effort. Yes, we do. Still very birdy, and I'm doing exactly what it says there. So again, that tip was in pieces like Messiaen's Merle Noir, birds don't romanticize. They don't dance around the point, and they're very upfront, angular, but still short and with a pure tone. Let me know if this week's tip has been helpful to you, and also maybe comment on some of your other favorite bird solos that you think would very well apply to this kind of tip. Or if you find one that you really think needs to have a little bit more of a human intention behind it, let me know, and I will also check it out. I'll see you next week, and always flute happy, and make sure the birds are still birds. Growing up, I used to always get made fun of because I can't whistle very well. Instead, I just do bird calls. But I always just sound like a really weird R2-D2.